Hi, everybody. I just blasted my ears with the volume button. Hello, I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. Welcome to the Agronomists. It's going to be a good one. I can tell. Myself and the guests, who I'll bring in shortly, are all wearing blue and totally color coordinated without actually planning it that way. Big shout out to John in the comments for already welcoming everyone. And hello to Kara, of course. I'm glad you guys are discussing the weather because that is absolutely going to be coming up tonight. I did want to mention very quickly, you can qualify for CEU credits for joining us for this broadcast. So make sure you head on over to the realagriculture.com/agronomists to get your CEU credits tomorrow. And I will mention it at the end, but I did want to quickly remind everyone, it is mid-July, and that means here in Ontario, Diagnostic Days. And we are once again doing the virtual version of Diagnostics Days here in Ontario. And Real Agriculture will be hosting a special live kickoff next Tuesday, 10 a.m. Eastern on our live stream. So be sure to check it out. It'll sort of be the agronomists in the daytime, which probably means the comments will be slightly more general PG. All right. But without further ado, let's bring in our experts for the evening. Nathan Gregg joins us all the way from Saskatchewan. He farms near the Battlefords and lives at Humboldt. And of course, Peter Pete Johnson. Welcome here.
Hello.
Hey, thanks, Lyndsey. Yeah. We're all wearing blue because England lost the Euro Cup.
I was just thinking
in a shootout. In a shootout, like, how do you lose a shoot? Oh my gosh! And the keeper made such an amazing save on that last shot by the Italian squad, and then England team couldn't even make another goal. Bah humbug! Bah humbug!
So I will state for the record, I actually did watch like the first 15 minutes of the game, and that's probably the most soccer I've watched in a very long time. So when I left, things were hunky-dory. So I don't know what happened after that. But now I do want to, Nathan, this is your first time here on The Agronomist. So if you wouldn't mind, let the audience know who you are. What are you up to?
Sure. Well, like you said, I farm out near the Battlefords towards Lloydminster, I guess, out in Saskatchewan. In my former life, when I was a working stiff, as they say, I worked at the Prairie Agricultural Machinery Institute for about 17 years or so, doing all the things that we do there, focused on machinery and soils and combine testing and all that kind of fun stuff. And now I'm doing just as I always say, and everybody that I'm on boards with and things, I tell them I'm just farming, and they say, you're not supposed to say I'm just farming.
That is correct. Yes, exactly.
Well, Nathan, in actual fact, you're farming. If I had enough nerve and if I was smart enough, if I could actually do it, I would be farming. So, them that can't teaches and them that can does. So you can, so you're doing that. You're way out there, man. That's awesome.
Some of each, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. So so tonight though, we are talking about residue management. We're talking about residue management at the combine. We're also going to throw in a few other fun little things that we can do at the combine. I've got a surprise little clip in here that I'm quite proud of myself for finding and throwing in here. So now my guests know what's coming, but nobody else does. So I did want to say yes, Warren Schneckenberger, I really do hope we can get together soon. And Agrodome, no, I do not prefer basketball. I do not watch basketball. I'm sorry.
What?
I'm sorry about, what is it, Detroit? Doesn't Phil love Detroit? I'm sorry. What do you mean, what's the matter with me? Okay. Anyway, I was going to note, yes, so soccer is done. Also, this evening, we're not up against an NHL Stanley Cup final game, which we have been for the past few weeks, but we are up against Shark Week. So Shark Week is happening right now. So let's hope that we're entertaining enough to draw a few people away. There you go. Oh, and Kara has a rule. She says no basketball talk on any live stream. Apparently that's a rule, and I am now going to stick with it. Okay, so before we get into any of our clips or those sorts of things, let's just do a quick sort of recap of, with the geographic areas that you both are in, sort of where we're at as far as heading into harvest. So what crop stage we're at. Nathan, I'll start with you. How do things look out by the Battlefords?
Well, I guess it just depends exactly where you are. I mean, we're definitely on the drier side, and right around where I'm farming, we've had, I guess, maybe a total of just under 3 inches of rain here this season, and it's been a month or more since we had anything substantial. So we're definitely on the drier side. Things seem to be holding on, not too terribly. It's definitely shorter stature in the crops, but they're still there. They're not all yellow and falling over just yet. But that depends where you go. It doesn't take very far of a drive to get where they really are suffering. So definitely on the drier side, but I guess crossing our fingers, still hoping we got a chance.
Mm-hmm. Now, Pete, how about where you are?
Yeah, so we went from, drought to deluge, and man, it will not stop raining now. Mother Nature does that to us. It's either feast or famine, and right now it's beyond feast. So as Agrodome Phil put in the chat there, he's underwater in Chatham-Kent. There's areas down there that I don't know how much rain they've had, but they started out with 9 inches all at once. 9 inches of rainfall in one day, maybe even in 3 or 4 hours. Like, it was just unbelievable. My own farm, it's wheat harvest time. Dang it, I should not be on the Agronomist tonight. I should be hauling wheat or driving combine or doing some real farm work. Yeah, it's way too wet here. And Ontario's a little bit variable because some of the growers in southwestern Ontario have been able to pull a little bit of wheat out of the field. It just depends where you're at. Yields so far have been above average. Nathan, we were set up for record, man. We had unbelievable potential, and then Mother Nature turned the heat on, just like it did. Not as bad as you guys, but bad
we didn't
enough.
Get the heat dome. Yeah.
No, we didn't get the heat. We didn't get the 6 days of 35 Celsius plus, right? But it was still too hot for the wheat crop. So it's above average, which is good. If we could just get it out of the field before, I don't want to get to be like Missouri, right? Missouri got 20 inches of rain, and even the soft red wheat was all sprouted. It had 1/2-inch legs on it when they were combining it on standing heads. Like, anyway. Hopefully,
that's when you just turn the cows out at that point. You just turn them out and you just let them eat it.
They tramp too much. They tramp too much.
Yeah.
It is interesting watching on Twitter, like you can tell where different regions are, because all of Saskatchewan is sort of talking about drought, and even Manitoba, which they seem to never have to whine about being dry, but and then you can see the farmers out in Ontario, whatever, like you say, now they're talking about turn the taps off, please stop.
Yeah. Oh, it's unbelievable. And I did, like you said, Pete, I saw, Woody Van Arkel shared some pictures of all that rainfall that fell in he was walking water to his knees, and that's Woody's knees, not my knees. Like, that's a significant amount of water. Like, it was
that's your
ridiculous.
Hips.
Yeah, that's basically, I carry hip waders for exactly that reason. But Pete, it does bring up, and we're going to go to our first clip shortly, but it does certainly bring up a bit of an alert, and maybe that's why we magically switched this week for next week on the Agronomist, so that you are here this week, so next week you will totally be in the field, and all those sorts of good things. But when we're talking about fusarium development and dawn development, how important is it to get that wheat out of the field once it's ready to go?
Yeah, it's incredibly important, as every farmer in Ontario knows, because every day, every hour that wheat crop is over 19% moisture, fusarium can continue to develop. And it actually, at this point, when the wheat is mature, it creates more dawn, because the toxin is how it kills the cells. Well, these cells are harder to kill, so it takes more toxin to kill the cells so it can infect and continue to grow. And we've seen situations where one wet weekend, we've basically doubled dawn concentrations. Fortunately, Lyndsey, initial infection in the wheat crop is reasonably low this year. We're really lucky. If every head had a little bit, man, we'd be in for a 96 disaster, I think, at this point. We're not there, but it's not just fusarium. It's also black point, it's mildew, and what's really going to start catching us, I'm worried about, is falling number. So for the people, like Phil says, he's pushing water in front of the combine. Warren's out there pulling wheat off as wet as 22%. If you can get it out of the field, get it out of the field, because if we get into a whole lot of low falling number, good quality wheat is really going to demand a premium.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And when you said 96, you mean 1996? was a really bad year for fusarium? Okay, I was in high school. I'm just going to point that out, Pete.
1996 was the fusarium disaster in Ontario, Lyndsey. And just because you're young and still wet behind the ears doesn't mean the rest of us are.
Right. Okay, got it. I just like to keep note of, significant years in history. And so now I know that 96, I was more worried about other things than Pete. Okay, let's head to our first clip, which, Pete, I will say it is a solid clip. Okay. But the shining star is your mustache. So I'm just going to warn everyone right now. So what I didn't write down the year, but I think you were doing a Movember, were you not? Or did you lose a bet? No, this is November.
This is November. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, Jay, can you cue up? We're going to talk about combine modifications. Here we go.
We're back on Residue again, and it's just driving me crazy that we still aren't doing a good job of spreading that residue. Think about it just for a really quick minute. That residue has a whole whack of potash. In an alfalfa field, if you take off 1 ton of alfalfa, that's 60 pounds of potash. If you have more than a ton, so now we're starting to talk about 5 or 6 ton alfalfa, 360 pounds of potash in 6 tons of alfalfa. Corn residue, same thing. Wheat residue. Every time I talk about residue, a whack of potash. If you don't spread that residue out uniformly, well, all of a sudden now you've changed the soil fertility just based on the residue. Not only that, we have all this lousy cold soil underneath the residue. We just have to get better. So we're here at Blythebrae Farms, and they have a bean machine, right? Edible beans. Well, how much residue in edible beans, for crying out loud? None. Why would it be a big deal? Every year, after we plant wheat in an edible bean field, those residue strips just show up. So here's a thought process. These guys are finally taking residue seriously. And they've added on this hydraulic spreader. So all it is, a couple of hydraulic motors with some spinners there, some hydraulic hoses up the front, $3,000 to put this on. Now, rather than getting this crappy wide, 6 foot wide bunch of residue that I can't plant into, I get hairpinning because they're edibles, the soil's always loose. I have all this lousy, uneven wheat that's not going to do the best job. Now I spread it out, and I can get a much better wheat stand. The one thing wrong with this particular unit, we still have all the trash coming off the sieves. So everything that's coming off the sieves is still getting into that windrow. Now it's edible beans, so maybe we get away with that. But realistically, we have to figure out a way to spread that out. And if I have a 45-foot head, Lord help us, we got to spread the residue, the chaff, and the stover that's coming out the back. We have to get that spread 45 feet wide, and that's how it is. So it took a really long time for the big equipment manufacturers to actually get their brains around the fact that a combine isn't just for taking the grain out of the crop, and all that residue doesn't matter a doggone. Finally, the big equipment manufacturers, I don't care if it's green or it's red or it's yellow or whatever, black, you name it, they all are slowly getting there. But if you don't have a brand new one, man, you go back 5 years ago, those 5-year-old combines, which there's lots of them out there, they do not do a good job of residue spread. But this is a beauty system because right now it's set up that we're spreading all the things coming off the rotor. All the straws getting spread there. If I want to windrow the straw, because straw's worth a lot of money, and man, if I can make more money, our data's clear. Sell the straw, put the rotation in, and your soil is better. So I'm okay with selling the straw. Oh, I want to windrow the straw. All I got to do is put that up and drop this down, and now I'm windrowing the straw. But that's, again, not the whole story. So what about all the chaff coming off the doggone sieves? Well, with this system, now we're spreading all the chaff coming through here. If we want to windrow the chaff, it's really simple. We're just in here. We just drop that down. That can go in the windrow. You know, a guy out west that wants to feed the straw wants that chaff in the windrow, so now we have it in the windrow. But if I don't want it in the windrow, and I almost never want it in the windrow because it just lays in that really narrow band. So on Johnson's combine, if ever he could afford one of these combines, she's always going to be set up here so that that goes into the spreader And the other really cool thing is that some of these manufacturers, this one's one, the new premium series John Deere, big S690, 680s, they have this premium series where it adjusts for the wind. So now I have a 45-foot spread pattern. I turn around at the end, we know how fast the wind is, and automatically adjust the fins or adjust the paddles to throw it out so that we compensate and we get that perfectly uniform spread pattern. Really cool technology. For all you guys out there like me with old equipment, you have to do everything you can. Power tailboards. I have an old white combine, new knives in the chopper, because even with a 15-foot spread pattern, or 15-foot head, I don't get the spread pattern if I have old worn knives. This is important stuff. Let's do the job right, and that's just how it is.
So let's summarize.
Who is that guy?
Can I say, though, have you ever considered dressing up as Chris Hadfield for Halloween? Because I really think you've got it. Like, really.
I like it.
I do too. Okay, just start at October 1st instead of November 1st and you're set. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in that one, Pete, and I do love it. Love the energy. Janet said too. She loves this video. I did have some questions come in that I think we're probably going to talk about fan settings and those sorts of things a few times. But Nathan, I'll go to you first. In thinking about Western Canada with a potentially light crop for sure, how do you find that balance between blowing out maybe some very, very small kernels out the back, but not losing that light crop? I think this is going to be important.
That's a tough one. Well, and some would argue that you maybe want to blow out some of the light kernels, not to ruin the sample with what you do have. But yeah, I mean, it definitely trying to, as is the case for setting combines in general, you're always, pushing one direction only to counter for the other. So it does become a bit of a battle between what's your biggest bang for your buck, I guess is the best way to put it. With the light crop we're expecting, probably, I think it maybe comes down to, I guess I'm thinking more of what that residue is going to look like. We just don't have the sheer mass that we're going to have to process through the machine. So the machine itself is going to behave differently in the rotor and cylinder as far as the threshing and separating goes. And so by the time the material even gets to be spread, we're maybe in a different state than we're used to. We don't have 2 foot long stalks that are raggy and hanging together. We might have more powder. So that kind of, it changes maybe what your settings for the chopper and the speed that you want to run it at. But more than likely, I'm thinking more of the discharge vanes, either out of the discharge beater or off the back of the tailboard to get rid of that material. I think that's probably where there's, I guess, being that we're coming from some wetter years where we've had higher than average material other than grain to deal with, we're kind of swinging the pendulum back the other direction, and that's where we're maybe going to be having to pay more attention than we're used to.
And so Nathan, can I ask, because I really like, you're the equipment guy, I'm the agronomist, and I'm not an equipment guy, but so
I'm some of both and not good at either. So.
Okay, well, I'm probably not good at anything, but that's a whole other issue. So to set that combine, because, with short straw, the rotor gets really aggressive. And, we go to a stripper header, and when we have a stripper header, immediately we start to have trouble with all the grain dropping too early, and we can overload things. But do we set that rotor differently so that it pushes that grain back more quickly, or do we just add more forward speed, or how do we try to maintain some integrity to that residue so it gets to the back of the combine? Because if it's dust, like, how do you spread dust? You got to have some size, right? No, you can't. So what's the setup there?
Well, I think you said it well, really. I mean, you have to be paying attention to what those rotor settings are for speed and for clearance, because if by the time it gets out of the back of the feeder house into the front of the concaves and it all just falls through, we're we're overloading one system and not utilizing the other, essentially, right? So we want to be trying to even and balance that load to some degree, get that material further back. So I guess my personal I guess, witchcraft or whatever you want to call it. Lots of people say it's black magic, setting a combine on the best of days. So, but my personal preference is to start, when it comes to aggressiveness, is to start with clearance. I think that, speed, yes, it affects it, but it's maybe a little bit more forgiving than if you've got a tight rotor clearance. There's going to be smashing and destruction going on immediately. So that's sort of where I start. I try to do that, and then be working with the speed to ramp it up to get the job done. I mean, there is a balance in my viewpoint, and I've heard a lot of people talk about, the saying when rotary combines were first coming on the market was, we need grain on grain threshing, and there was a lot of emphasis put on using the material within the rotor to do the threshing. I don't personally subscribe to that train of thought to a great extent, because I think, steel on grain also works for threshing. So I guess when you hear the folks trying to tell you just need to drive faster because you got to get more material in there, I've always been a little bit hesitant to jump on that train.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And
go ahead.
My 9500, I've stepped up from the old white that was in the video, baby. I've got a 9500, but it's a conventional combine. And man, if it's small kernels, you got to set the clearance on the conventional combine tight to get the small kernels out of the head. And so there's differences depending. I know most guys are rotaries now, but there's still conventional combines out there, and it's different.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I guess throw out everything I just said if we're talking about a conventional combine, because with that, the concave clearance, you only get one crack at it, right? It only sees that at one moment in time. It doesn't get three passes before it spits out the back. So concave clearance does matter. And I mean, we can talk in generalities, but year to year, and the humidities and all those different things play into it. I mean, you can have the same wheat variety threshes like it's concrete blocks one year, and the next year goes through like butter. So it's hard to talk just in generalities, because I've experienced it where we've had to tighten up the concave clearance just to thresh the seeds out of the heads, right? So I guess it's hard to make a rule of thumb that just applies in every condition.
Yeah, but
what I've got so far, though, is driving faster isn't always the solution. I wrote that down.
Yeah, well, you'll never catch me saying that one, I guess.
Because that's a good rule of thumb. Okay? All right. And Pete, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, to get residue spread, though, we really do have to try to get that straw out the back with some size to it, because otherwise we just can't, right? Right,
yeah. And I think you kind of mentioned there a little bit in the video about, the uniformity of the sizing as well. Like if you've got all these different lengths and sizes of material, they aren't going to fly with the same trajectory or the same momentum, that is not imparted by any paddles or whatever. So we aren't going to get the same spread out of a whole variable size of material. So if we can get some larger by the time we get to the chopper, so that we get a little bit more of a uniform cutting, so that we do end up with more uniformly sized particles. Those are going to spread a little more even. We're going to have a better chance of achieving full spread pattern, as opposed to if it's coming out big, small, big, small, big, small. We're going to get puffs of material, and some that falls off and hits the tires, and some that hits the crop 40 feet out or 25 feet out.
Yeah. So, Pete, how do you think we're doing? Obviously, Ontario-wise, how are we doing getting that spread width the same as the header width?
Horrible. Full stop. Terrible. No,
I was hoping we were like a C+.
Okay. So there are certainly combines out there that will do the job. And I mean, Warren's in the chat, and he's got a Lexion combine, and he was combining wheat today. He sent me a picture. And he tried to do the rake test. So, Nathan, do you do the rake test out west to figure out how your residue spread pattern is?
I guess I'm not familiar with it under that name.
Yeah. Well, explain away, Pete.
So you take your leaf rake, right? The rake you use to rake your leaves in the fall. and you start at if it's a 40-foot cut or whatever it is, you start at the outside behind the combine, and you reach this way with the rake and pull it to the middle, and you reach this way with the rake and pull it to the middle, and then you move and so that you start where you stopped and you go all the way across the combine, and every pile should be the exact same size, because it's really hard to get a good sense. And he said, man, the rake test, this stuff is just spread so well and cut so fine that the rake won't even grab it, but you could just tell it was uniform and the way that it should be. Yeah. But when I drive through the countryside, there's so many custom combine operators. I have clients that use a custom combine operator, and they curse at him every fall because I'm their agronomist and I'm saying that isn't good enough. And he just says, are you going to pay me more to do a good job of residue spread? Because if I have to do a good job of residue spread, I got to buy an aftermarket spreader. Like I don't have brand new combines that will do the perfect job. And there's so much of that out there, Lyndsey. And by the way, Phil put in the chat, maybe we should just plow the residue. Well, Phil, if you plow the residue, there's a whole range of other problems, as you know, but the potash, wherever you plow the residue down, that's where the potash out of the residue is going to be. So the plow is not going to solve that uniformity of nutrient application that residue is. And there's a lot of potash in wheat straw and in corn stover. There's a little bit of potash in soybeans, but there's nothing good in soybeans anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
There are some questions coming up about soybean residue, which I'm like, what soybean residue? What are we even talking about? But that, of course, like in the video, though, I mean, you said too, I mean, when we're talking about edible beans, soybeans, these sorts of things, there is still residue that we do have to manage. So there you go. And someone also said, I smell a Phil Needham video coming up, and I will have you know, I had them picked out, and I'm not going to use any tonight because we've used them on past episodes. So that is not the surprise, but Phil is, of course, and he's of course an expert on this, and we'd love to always have Phil Needham videos. But one of the ones I got was from 2013, and even I thought, you know what, we're going to leave that one for tonight. Okay. Also, Phil says he was kidding about the plow, but where is it? John had a question here. Seems to me that straw that's too big won't fly any better than straw that's too short. Or am I wrong? Who wants to take that one?
I guess I can try.
Okay.
I mean, I think there's some truth to that. Without getting too much into physics, because I'm no expert in it either. But I mean, it becomes a question of, how much force can be applied and what are the aerodynamics that are going to restrict the movement within the air, so how much air drag, et cetera, those types of things. I mean, I don't want to go deep down that path, but suffice it to say, I do think that there's probably a happy medium where a particle of a certain size you can impart a force on and make it get it to achieve a velocity, whereas things that are too small you can't get them to move, and things that are too big have too much air drag that's going to slow them down so they don't move either. So it's sort of, there's a middle ground,
a Goldilocks zone, right, Pete?
Yeah, I'm sort of thinking that one of the issues with bigger, longer straw is how hard it is to handle after the combine. Because if I think about it, I take a chunk of straw that's, a foot long and I throw it like an arrow. And if I took a chunk of straw that was 3 inches long and threw it like an arrow, I'm pretty sure the 12-inch one would go further. But to get uniform spread, if they're all 2 feet long, well, they just naturally want to bunch and not get that uniform spread pattern. Whereas if you get that in the sweet spot, just as Nathan talked about, then I think you can do a much better job of getting that uniformity. So I think actually, Nathan, they would throw, but if you got all these big pieces, you get a big piece there or 10 big pieces there, and it's just harder to get that uniformity that we desperately need. Because the other thing I mentioned that we haven't even touched on is underneath the residue, it's cold and wet. Where there is no wet residue, it's warm and dry. Now, how do you expect a crop to be uniform when you got some in cold and wet and some in warm and dry? give your head a shake. It ain't going to happen, right?
So Pete, that's our next clip, but I'm not going there yet, even though that would have been a perfect segue, only because I am going to ask Varen's question, who I like to call Brent, but that's a whole other story. What is the nutrient loss from soybean straw if you bale it versus spreading it back?
So it will depend on a few things. I'll take that one, Nathan, if it's okay.
Yep, please.
In general terms, if it gets rained on in the fall, the more rain you get on it, Viren, the less potash is in it. And it's really interesting. Potash leaches out of residue. It doesn't matter if it's corn stalks or it's soybean straw or it's wheat stubble, really quite quickly. If it's a perfectly dry fall, there would probably be close to a penny a pound worth of phosphorus and potash in that soybean straw. If it's a wet fall like we normally get, it's probably half a penny a pound. And so if you want the actual numbers, I can look them up. I don't carry those numbers in my head, but even at today's prices, it's typically, residue that's not rained on, it's a penny a pound, somewhere in that range with phosphorus and potash.
Okay. We don't use pennies anymore, Pete, so we're going to have to go with nickels. So you're going to have to say it's like a nickel per, 5 pounds. So there you go. If you could work on that, that'd be great.
Would actually, you like $22 a ton? $22 a ton. There you go.
There you go. Wow. So you do have things up in that head. Okay. So I want to come back to this whole bale it versus spread it discussion, because we also had a recent wheat school on that, which, I mean, a lot of people had many follow-up questions for that. But you're right. We haven't really talked about why residue spread is so incredibly important at the combine. And perhaps we shouldn't have assumed as much, but that is our next clip. We're going to head west. We're going to talk about canola establishment and residue management with Leighton Blaschko. And then we can actually, start where we probably should have started, which is why is this so important? So Jay, let's head to that clip now.
Getting out into the field and you're starting to kind of look at trash management, looking at what sort of residue you have on your field. What are some of the things you should be looking for?
Well, for me, I think it comes down to monitoring the uniformity of straw that you have in a field. For me, if you have a uniform seed bed, you're going to have a uniform stand. So I think those are the things you want to look at, is how much straw do you have, where is it uniformly spread, and is it chopped up finely, or is it larger, longer lengths? So those are the things that you need to monitor.
Okay, and why does it make a difference when you're looking at these longer lengths? Why is it important to have that uniform seed bed?
Well, when you're thinking about establishing a canola crop, you want to make sure that every plant has a chance to yield its best. So if you're able to have a very uniform seed bed, you then have the best chance to place every seed in a nice perfect area where it has that perfect microclimate to be put at the perfect depth and to germinate, emerge, and produce a healthy crop, a very uniform crop. And the reason those things are important is because we want to ensure that if you have uniformity, you're able to then time a lot of your other things properly. Your herbicide application will be more timely, your impact on a fungicide application will be more timely, and then even things like your decision at harvest, or swathing, or your seed color change measurement for straight cutting, whatever it might be, those things are all going to come into line really, really uniformly.
So unfortunately, it's one of those things that you might be the field now and you're going, I should have done this at harvest or done that at harvest. But what can be done now in the springtime when you're kind of looking at this?
Yeah, I think right now is the time that you need to start looking at field by field and making decisions. How good of a job did I do last fall? So if the combine did a really good job, maybe you have to do nothing. Or if you think, well, maybe certain fields need a little bit of a touch-up, or they need to be more uniform from the straw management standpoint, then there's a few options you have. Some things could be heavy harrowing, just to spread out that straw layer, just to make it very uniform across the whole landscape. Another thing might be more aggressive would be vertical tillage, high-speed discs, or a bit of a incorporation of that residue. So each of those has its own pluses and negatives. I think for me, It's you're managing soil moisture. So doing nothing would manage soil moisture the best if you're trying to conserve soil moisture. In parts of northern Alberta, we've been dealing with excess moisture, so maybe you may choose a little more aggressive approach to maybe reduce the soil moisture that you have so that you're able to get in some of these fields a little bit more. The other thing that you're going to balance with this different level of aggressiveness is unfortunately club root spread. So the less aggressive you are, so doing nothing will keep club root spores or patches minimized. Whereas if you're doing something fairly aggressive, like a vertical tillage or high-speed disc, that can spread spores out across the whole field, unfortunately.
Okay, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think that, when we've made this decision and you go out and do the job, you then establish your canola crop. I think the most important thing is to measure your success or see how well did you do the job. Was it your plant stand exactly where you wanted it to be? Was it better than you thought, or was it poorer? So, as everything agronomy, I think we need to measure it so we can learn from it. And that's about all I think that we need to consider for this topic.
So, as Kara mentioned, that it was -10 and for that video shoot. So I'm glad the camera kept working.
It's Western Canada. -10 is nothing, man. It's a dry cold. It's nothing.
Hey, that is legit, though. Okay, it's also way sunnier there than here, so I'm with that. Okay, so now Leighton did a great job sort of summarizing, of course, exactly that even emergence and how that even emergence, that stand establishment makes all our decisions after that much easier if we've got a uniform crop. So this is why we are talking about residue management, but I do want to stick with canola for just a bit. And Pete, you can hop in anytime you want, but I know this is not your favorite crop. So I'll go to Nathan on this one, though. Tell me did you do any work on measuring combine loss too when harvesting canola?
Oh, yeah. We've done quite a bit, I guess.
Yeah, okay. That's where I'm going with this, is that what were some of the main things that some of the main take-home messages in the recent work that you worked on managing combine loss?
Well, I guess it sort of always boils back to, I think, in large part, always comes back to the operator. We field calls every year, it seems like at harvest time of, I've got the biggest, baddest, newest machine and it still throws over canola. And the answer invariably comes back to, how hard are you pushing on the stick? And I think that's, we've harped for years that there should be instead of a loss monitor, that there should be a giant boxing glove that comes out of the ceiling and pops you in the head when you get going too fast, because that you'll pay attention to. Otherwise, you can set the loss monitor to tell you whatever you want, and it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, I like this idea.
Yeah, and so I think what essentially the real answer is that most of the time it's the nut behind the wheel, the steering wheel that is the problem. And if that nut would only figure out how to get the job done, it would be less of a problem.
Absolutely. So, all right. So I've written down now twice, stop going so fast, or some version of that, because it would seem that's at least part of the story. But we do have a couple of questions and comments coming in. So John says, what about if we mow bore plow, after combining and the residue wasn't spread perfectly, is there a stand yield effect the next year after tillage? Why do we have to talk about plowing? Pete?
Yeah, so first off, John, you spelled plow correctly. It's a 4-letter word, and we're not allowed to use 4-letter words. So therefore, we cannot use the plow. Get over it. We just have to get beyond that. Is there a residue penalty? If there is, it's much reduced because you've buried it. You've mixed it in. Leighton talked about the high-speed disc. So again, you're mixing that in. The one thing that Leighton really did mention that I wanted to focus in on a bit was you go out there with your heavy harrow and it'll move some of that straw around. And I think Jeneth made a really good comment that you get to Manitoba, you get to Ontario, that straw management really does need to be done more in the fall than the spring. Whereas if you get to the drier areas, more where you are, Nathan, or into Alberta, I think spring management is possible. But the heavy harrow will not fix the chaff behind the combine. And this chaff strip has become such an issue in Ontario that it boggles my brain. So we have growers. My great friend Chad Anderson, he's an agronomist in South Lambton County, the breadbasket of Ontario, he likes to call it. It's terribly heavy clay. It's just, you could in the middle of summer you can land a 747 on it and not make a mark. That's the kind of soil it is. But they windrow the straw, bale the straw. They plant double crop soybeans after the wheat crop. They harvest those. They come back in and plant soybeans again the next year. And the wheat windrows, where that chaff is, that next year, after they've had a soybean crop come off of it, they can see every strip in the field. And so chaff spread, like, do not. I said in my video, don't, but I'm even stronger now. Do not windrow chaff. And if your combine can't separate the chaff and spread the chaff, then buy a different combine, for crying out loud. Like, it just, it really does make a huge difference. And the crop where we learned that first was canola. And I know I'm not a canola guy. By the way, Lyndsey, I actually have a secret love for canola, because you can grow winter wheat after spring canola in Ontario, and it is awesome winter wheat. So it's actually okay. Canola is okay.
So there you go. Okay.
There's a ton of pods come over the chafer, over the sieve out of the back of a combine in a good canola crop. You get a 1.5 ton or a 2 ton canola crop, man, you can't plant wheat into that to save your soul if you don't spread it. So it's just one of those things. We got to get better. We just got to get better.
Okay, I have so many things. So 2 things. One, that's what they do in Manitoba as well. The canola comes off, winter wheat goes in, if they're going to grow it. So I'm just saying, also happens out west. 2, what was the next one? Now I've lost it. So we'll come back. Oh no, my next question was, and this is for either of you, both of you, however, what is it about the chaff? Is it nutrient tie-up that is causing that? That why we see those strips so persistent 2 years later? Or what's the actual mechanism happening at the soil level that causes those strips?
Yeah. So you want to go, Nathan? You want me to?
No, well, I'm sure you'll be a much better expert. I mean, my answer is that I think it's a combination of a few of those factors that we've already discussed. From the, I guess for us, it's probably more to the initial germination side of things. It's more about the cooler soils that we're seeing, damper, those types of things that are delaying that emergence. But longer term, seeing those strips, I have to believe there has to do with some nutrient tie up as well. So, but Pete, you can tell us the truth now.
No, Nathan, I think you hit it right bang on the head. So, is there some nutrient tie up? Sure, there is, but with soybeans, if it was just nutrient tie-up, it's nitrogen, right? The nutrient you're tying up mainly is nitrogen because it's high carbon. And so the bugs need nitrogen out of the soil. They take it first. And with a soybean crop, you'd see a little bit longer yellow period to the soybean crop. But once the nodules start fixing their own nitrogen, that typically disappears. We see it in no-till soybeans into corn stalks all the time. So that would disappear, but it's not disappearing. And so particularly, remember, Chad's on heavy clay soil. Underneath that residue, breakdown is slower because it's cold, it's wet, and it just keeps it cold and wet. And then on heavy clay soil, we get into more root rots in the soybeans. So there's more disease pressure there. But primarily, the problem with residue, like if it was just nutrient, man, put on some nitrogen, we can fix it. There's no way to fix the problem with that residue. So it is a soil temperature, soil moisture problem. And then it adds disease problems and maybe insect problems as well, right? You can get insect problems as well.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. Now, I want to call out Warren Schneckenberger's comment about lots of plows around here each fall and that the plow is the best. Okay, so first of all, it's not. Second of all, I understand that there are still a lot of plows in Ontario, but I have yet to see a farmer cut a field in thirds or in four and do a replicated trial of mobile plow versus not. And they all say it worked great. Well, of course it worked great. You have nothing to compare it to, and it's how you've always done it. So don't give me that. All right? Anyway. So yeah, exactly, Warren. You know where I live. You come on over, and actually, I'll go over that way. It's more exciting over there. And Jason, I did want to say, you said that the soil, Pete, that you described down in Lambton County sounds like over in Elm Creek, or in between Elm Creek and Starbuck. And I will tell you that area of Manitoba and that area of Ontario absolutely remind me of both. I have been in both, and they totally are very similar. So there you go. It's not just the soil beneath your feet. They do really remind me of each other. So there you go. Warren's coming over. He's bringing a plow. Okay, so John, just so that our head explodes, John says, should we plow at 90-degree angles twice in the fall to mix up the chaff, then in the spring cultivate at 45-degree angles? I feel like I'm in math class. All right, the first plow pass, and then 90 to the first How many times are you going over the field, John?
Hey, John, you just keep doing that, John. You're going to go broke with doing all that tillage. So the residue won't matter, man. It just won't matter. And the erosion you're going to have is, come on your hills up in Bruce County, you know better than that, John. That's like, there's tillage, by the way, the plow isn't going to move the residue at all to speak of, right? And so if I've got a 4-foot wide chaff strip, you plow that down. You could plow it 6 ways from Sunday. It's still going to move maybe 6 inches one way or another maximum. So tillage ain't the answer, period.
There you go. Okay.
That's 4 swear words, isn't it? He plowed 4 times.
That's 4 in a row, Nathan. So and Jay, our producer, says it sounds like an A1 dad mowing the lawn. Got to do it at each angle so that you got the nice squares. There you go. Okay. So, all right. There we go. The plow is a 4-letter word. I'm not saying it never gets used. I'm just saying it's probably used a little too much. Okay, we are running out of time, which is not surprising, but I am really glad that we did bring up some club group discussion. We talked a little bit about residue management because I do want to talk a little bit about an issue we're having here in Ontario. And this last video clip is one that when we did this video in 2019 at Agritechnica, it was sort of to say, hey, isn't this cool? Probably won't ever see it in North America. But we're going to watch the clip and then maybe let's talk about if we will see this technology come to North America. So Jay, if you could get off your lawnmower and cue up this last clip.
Okay, so you won a silver award here at the show, and the silver awards are very prestigious in terms of innovation. Tell us about this header behind us.
Yeah, the header behind us is corn head, as obvious you can see, and our innovation is that we split the corn head in 2 pieces. So we have 2 independent wings that can go up and down, and therefore we have a more controlled contour following. So the left wing can go up and the right wing can go down, so you have more ground control. And additional to that, we have another horizontal chopper underneath with a special knife, so we can chop the stubble into like 1-inch pieces. So there's no stubble left in the field.
And that's to benefit because there's no BT trade here, so it's trying to prevent European corn borer.
Yes, correct. We don't have any GMO crops in Europe. Therefore, people have to either spray or use different machinery after the harvest to get rid of the corn borer. And we said, okay, you need to do it during the harvest, because you don't drive over any stubble and everything. So if you're done with the field combining, you're done with the field. You don't have to do any other jobs. So that's why we invented the special knife and the split.
Okay, and is the flex point in the middle, does it basically move both ways? So that it can either be essentially a U or an upside down U, to put it in the simple terms?
Yeah, correct. You can smile or you can groom, but you can also go like diagonal pretty much. So they don't go both up or both down. One can go up and the other one stays level. So they're totally independent from each other.
Tell us about the row unit for it specifically.
Yeah, the row unit is technically the normal rotor disc row unit. It's like a 3-roller unit, row unit. You have 2 rollers pulling the stalks down, and then there's one roller with 15 knives on them, like rotor disc knives, and they turn upwards. So the plant gets cut into like 2-inch, like 5 centimeter pieces. So therefore you have already the straw is very short, and then the special knife underneath, horizontal knife, has a sharp edge on one side and like a 90 degrees angle on the back side. So you actually smash the stubble and it kind of explodes on the top, and therefore you get more moisture, more bacteria into the stubble to decompose the stubble way faster.
What size row numbers does it come in?
For now, we focus on the 8 row, 75 centimeters, because that's the standard machine in Europe, and it's still foldable, so you don't have to take the header off. You can fold it together and go on the road. We're looking into 12 row probably in the future, but therefore we still have to talk to the combine operators as well and manufacturers because of the horsepower you need. Of course, you have more. Yeah, there's more stuff happening underneath. You need more horsepower. You need more kilowatts on the header.
Yeah, you can make it as wide as you want, but you got to make sure that there's enough horsepower behind it to make sure it works properly.
Yeah, correct. To get a good result out of the whole process. Yeah.
Okay.
So, Pete, on the Christmas list or what?
Oh, horsepower, baby, horsepower. That is farmer testosterone. Horsepower, black smoke, recreational tillage. Give it.
All right. So, but I found now, okay, there's two things. One, if anyone knows Sean Haney, you know that he has a hard time changing a wiper blade. So the fact that he goes to Germany and asks all these amazing questions, he does a phenomenal job sounding like he knows what he's talking about with equipment. Anyway, I might be looking for a job tomorrow. Just everybody think of me. Okay. But it is true. But secondly, I found it really interesting. When they went to Agrotechnica, they come home with this Geringhoff header, but they're trying to mechanically essentially bust up all these corn stalks. Now, Pete, the discussion, there's a bit more to the video that said, well, it's not coming in North America because, of course, we have BT traits, we use them, everything's hunky-dory. But where are we at in Ontario? Could we see this as a partial solution, potentially, for what we're dealing with here?
We have all sorts of chopping heads here in Ontario now. And one thing about a chopping head is typically if you go to a chopping head, and the chap from Bosch mentioned it, right? Like you get all those fine pieces on the soil surface, then almost for sure you have to do some tillage. Because if you're in 200 plus bushel corn and you chop all the stalks into small pieces and lay them on the soil surface, then we tend to get a mat. And now we can get a thick enough mat that it actually holds the whole entire area cold and wet. And so you move to a chopping head, most of the time we end up having to do some tillage just to incorporate that. Just like Jenith said about the straw in Manitoba, like you have to do something in the fall because you just have such a mat of residue on the soil surface that's you can't plant into that most of the time. The opposite is, a lot of the old time no-tillers would say leave those corn stalks as intact as possible, leave them standing straight up if you can, take the oldest John Deere header you can find and run it as slow as you can and drive through the field and the corn stalks all look like they're still standing up, but the cobs are gone. That's perfect. So that's a little bit different, right, Lyndsey, in terms of now how do we manage the residue before it goes into the combine versus how do we manage the residue spread at the back of the combine. And so with corn, that's just a little bit different thought process. With wheat and canola and soybeans, it's all about the back of the combine.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, and John has one follow-up to this. If we want to no-till into corn, do we really want to chop stalks? I missed part of the video. It's okay. It wasn't in there, John. Don't worry. But it seems to me that the stalks won't rot as quick.
So there was a really good question earlier, too. Is there any additives that we can add to help break down that residue, right? And I think Jason mentioned Eco-T. Well, wait a minute. So breakdown in the soil is all biologically driven. And you would think it's high carbon, so add some nitrogen. If you just add some nitrogen to corn stalks, man, they should break down faster. Well, they've done good research in Illinois. I forget I think it was Campanetti maybe that did that research, where they tried adding nitrogen to the corn stalks and not adding nitrogen to the corn stalks. Zero difference in breakdown. And it's, I think, because it's so cold in the winter that even with that added nitrogen, the bugs aren't active. So could you add Eco-T? Well, if you don't have enough soil bugs that are working, and the bugs in the Eco-T actually are better at breakdown than the bugs in the soil, then could it help? Yeah, it could help. We know that, if you're in wheat with lots of wheat residue, that a little added nitrogen, when you add that to the oat crop, you get way better oat growth. You'll get a little faster residue breakdown generally on the wheat straw, but we're in a very warm time of the year, right? And the downside of that is if you break all the wheat residue down with adding nitrogen, and then you lose that nitrogen over the winter, you don't really get much benefit out of that nitrogen. So it's a nitrogen factor, it's a biological factor. When you chop it into little pieces, way more surface area, way more bugs can work on that surface area. We're going to get faster breakdown, but we still have to have dry soil to plant into. So it's and it's still cold in Ontario, and it's cold in Western Canada over the winter time. There ain't nothing breaking down when it's at -10 or -40.
And I just want to state, if we are going to talk biology, what's bad for biology? Tillage. But anyway, we'll just throw that out there. Now, I do want to bring it back out west because we've got Kara's got a question in the comments, and I've got one as well. But definitely, Kara is in southern Alberta. It is incredibly dry. There is very little crop there, if any. So two things. One is, what's your harvest strategy, Nathan, when you're looking at a very, very light crop? And then two, and that's Kara's question, is the risk of fire. What at the combine and during harvest should you be worried about in these very hot, dry, and potentially very dusty conditions?
Yeah, that's kind of a tough one, really, to chase two goals, I guess, really, to try to mitigate the fire danger and yet still maintain uniform spread. They're kind of opposing views in my head. I think, when we get these hot temperatures, we're much more prone to material buildups and air cleaners and things that draft in the discharged material. It tends to exacerbate the problem, make the temperatures that are hot that much hotter, kind of thing. So, I mean, it's tempting maybe to say that, especially if you're not getting much of a return on the crop, to say that maybe I don't want to try so hard to chop that material or to spread it as far, so that it's not blowing up into the air cleaner or around fuel pumps and things like that cause us problems. But I guess I think, your penalties from a residue perspective are not to be ignored either. I don't know what the answer is to that, to be quite honest. It's kind of a tough one.
Absolutely.
Make sure you have the water truck in the field.
Yeah, yep, that's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's tempting to say you could just windrow things and that way you've kind of got natural fire break, right? But I mean, you're hoping to crop that the next year. So I guess that's probably not a really, advisable solution.
Yeah. All right. Another question here from Boris. So what are our options in very heavy straw residue? So wheat, oats, canola in a zero-till scenario. Heavy harrow, bale, or burn, which, oh goodness, back in the day, we're not talking burning. Anyway, cattle guys don't pay enough for straw, and heavy harrows only do an average job. So I'll just have everyone know that I have sheep, and I only have 2 cows and 2 calves. So I will pay for straw. Just putting it out there. Anyway, Nathan, do you want to tackle that? I mean, these are, and then Pete, I'll go to you.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts are that maybe the decisions start earlier in the year. It's not just a harvest question. Then I think it's potentially it's number one, I would say, is looking at varieties of what are you growing? What's the straw length? How much leaf material? What's the density? What are they? What's the straw? I can't think of the right word, but sturdiness or structure. How thick are the stems? Are they designed to mitigate lodging and things like that? Those are all factors that are going to play into how that straw behaves and what you've got to deal with after harvest is over. Secondly, I would say that, if we're at harvest and here we are, what do we do? I think that an often overlooked aspect of residue management is cut height. It's something that is, easy to ignore. And it's often tough to even see, especially if you're combining at night and things you don't realize that if you're not using auto header height or things like that, you keep cutting lower and lower and lower. And I think if you are conscious about it, of trying to set that head height or the header height, pardon me, so that it's low enough to catch your lowest heads on the crop, but still high enough to leave some of that stubble that we don't have to process through the combine. I think that's an advantage. And I guess another one that is, probably not as easy to handle on an individual year-to-year basis, but it is consider what your header width is. Manufacturers are building bigger machines, and we're all pushing for wider headers, get more done. But when you start getting to 45 and 50 and 60-foot heads, I don't think in Canada, but in Australia, that's a lot of material, and it's a long distance to throw the material. So you might be better off downsizing a bit, stick to 30 or 35, and that way you can actually achieve a uniform spread.
There should be a law that you cannot put a header on a combine that is wider than the combine can spread the residue.
I don't know about a law, more like a guideline. Should it be a guideline? Maybe it should be a law.
Okay, well, it's an agronomic law. Maybe it's not an enforceable law, but it's an agronomic law.
So I did get on the text line, though. This does segue into this next question about, so if it's all about uniformity behind the combine, is the solution a stripper header?
And my answer to that is wonderful. Just don't forget that the stripper header still gets a lot of chaff into the combine. We still need to spread that chaff. We need something to spread the chaff behind the combine. And I mean, the chaff, it's almost impossible to spread it the full width because it's such small, light pieces. But don't leave it in a 4-foot or 5-foot swath. But yeah, stripper headers are great until you want to bale the straw, and then that's not such an excellent idea. But they also take a lot more power. There's a lot more wear to them, right, Nathan? Like, you're more of probably an expert on that than I am, but they come at a cost, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think there's some merit to the idea. I mean, I like the concept of it, but there is things to be dealt with, like from the maintenance perspective. And I will say, like Pete said, trying to spread chaff alone is almost impossible. You need other materials sort of mixed in there for it to ride along, to catch in the air draft type of thing, to be able to get any amount of spread. And that's, I mean, the chaff, the small particles are, for the most part, are what's causing us, our major issues, unless we're doing a terrible job of chopping and spreading the larger particles. Those aren't usually what's causing us the issue come seeding time or emergence. So it's the chaff that's the key part in my mind.
I will say earlier this week or late last week, in talking about planning for this episode, I've done a couple stories on stripper headers, but we were talking about how do you mitigate your farm against drought? And so we were talking about stubble height, of course, and sort of wished I could have interviewed Guy Lafond and a lot of his work there on stubble height out of Saskatchewan. Yeah. Just an absolute gem. And he did such fantastic work. And of course, stripper headers leave the tallest of the stubble. So if you don't know who Guy Lafond is, just Google it. He did some amazing work out west. So there you go. Also, joke of the night goes to John, who says, in Australia, the straw should spread better because the tailboard is upside down. Okay.
Well played.
Before you move on, by God, do not burn, okay? You do not, just please. Think about, I mean, I got beat up bad because I said sell the straw in a wheat school video, and it was focused on Ontario. Yep. Yeah, no, yes. I was talking about Ontario, and all the Western farmers said, "Are you insane? Like, that's our organic matter." Well, man, if you want organic matter, you light a match to it. Poof! There you go. Gone. There's gone. And it also adds a fair level of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, which we probably don't want to happen right now. So yeah, burning is out. And I think Nathan's right. Cut higher so you don't have such a mat of residue is step number one. And then use the heavy harrow if you need to is step number two. Stop. I will say burning also closes the number one highway every once in a while in Manitoba.
Not so much anymore, but when I was growing up, especially, so in the area that I was in southern Manitoba, it was when, of course, fusarium really started to ramp up in the province, and that was when we thought that burning residue would decrease the inoculum load and would somehow help the next year's wheat crop, which of course did not actually help. But I can remember growing up, I can remember just all the fields on fire, around all the swaths being burned. Thankfully, it happens far, far less now. But I'm not saying it never happens. It just happens far less. Jason has a question that we're over time, so we'll try, if you can, to keep it brief, but talk about, is there sort of, I guess this is where he's going with this, is there sort of an ideal matchup of residue size and spread behind the combine combined with what tillage practice and implement after that? So is there a magical, like, all right, here's a residue size that's good, and then go in after with this? Does any such combination exist?
I suppose to some degree, but I think there's other variables that would play into that, as far as, you know, what your seeding implement is, what your row spacing, all those types of things that, I guess, depending on what the sizing of that residue is, that you're trying to achieve, so that you don't get hairpinning or, you know, seed placement type issues. I don't know that I could come up with a magical solution, but I think there's truth to be had in there. Yes.
And so if there was a magical solution, Lyndsey, and Jason knows this, he's just poking us, I'm quite sure. If there was a magical solution, then Nathan and I wouldn't have to be on here talking about the whole, like, we'd already know that. But Jason is right that you, and Nathan alluded to it, that you really have to look at your situation. And so I think if you're in Alberta with little residue, that using a high-speed disc on that residue is all bad. It's 100% bad because it's too much tillage. So heavy harrow is all you need. If we get into Jeneth's area in Manitoba, where they've got quite a bit of straw, then maybe you have to do more aggressive tillage. By the way, John also asked, what's the three main takeaways? Well, if the residue's not spread evenly, then it really becomes, man, how do you deal with that effectively? And so takeaway number one is perfect residue spread, and that includes the chaff. That's a real big one, but that perfect residue spread. And then you try to take the least amount of tillage possible to give you good seed to soil contact. And how you get there, everybody's answer is going to be different, because some people wear green underwear and some people wear red underwear and other people want to wear blue underwear. And, like, I don't care. There's lots of similarities, but there's going to be differences.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think tillage is such we're talking about it as a four-letter word. I think that's so true. I do believe there's places for it, but you have to be certain of what you're going for. What is your goal with it? If it's you know, residue sizing and incorporation, that all sounds good. But if we're tilling and plowing at the same time as we're doing all that, if it's supposed to be a surface level type thing, often it's just fun to get in the tractor and go plowing, and we get carried away. We forget what we're doing, and there's consequences to be paid for that. So I agree. If we can avoid tillage, because moisture is going to be 9 times out of 10 the biggest thing for us out west, and why waste it if we don't have to? So there is a purpose for sprayer ruts and things like that. There's I can totally get on board, but as much as possible, I'd be aiming to avoid it.
Mm-hmm. And if you really are after more seat time, I think Patrick has the answer. You just get smaller equipment. And then he says 100 acres feels like 1,000. So there you go. Just get really little equipment. My 3 takeaways very similar, but I'll summarize them. And if anybody wants to send me theirs, by all means, but absolutely that match your spread width of the residue to the combine head. It's chaff we have to worry about, and we need to just slow down sometimes at the combine. That's what I'm going to say are my 3 takeaways. All right. Thank you, Pete. Thank you. Oh, and I dropped my phone. Let's hope it's not broken. And thanks, Nathan. Thanks for joining us. Thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. Fantastic comments, great discussion. Lots of familiar faces, a couple new ones as well. Thanks everyone for being a good sport, because of course we do like to have a little fun as we learn, of course. So everyone, a big thank you to my two guests, of course. I hope you will both be back. Pete, you kind of have to. So sorry about your luck. Hey, and maybe you'll have to host next week because I might not have a job. All right. And of course, get your CU credits. Head over to realagriculture.com/agronomist to sign up for those tomorrow morning. And next week, we will be back with our 8 p.m. time slot on the Monday and a special edition Tuesday, 10 a.m. Eastern for Diagnostic Days. So thank you both for joining me and for sharing of your time and your knowledge. And thanks everyone in the comments. Cheers, everybody.
It's awesome.
Thanks.
Bye.